By far, one of the most frequent parenting questions that I end up hearing is, how do I get my kid to behave? We are all always behaving. Humans are always behaving. The issue is that your child is not behaving the way that you want him to. So I would encourage you to maybe reframe the question as, how can I get my kid to behave the way that I want him to behave? And in order to get the answer to that question, we really need to start with the fundamentals. What is the behavior that you're looking for? And if we focus on what the behavior is that you're looking for in your child, what it is that you want him to do, instead of focusing on what you want him to stop doing, it will provide a whole lot more direction for how to respond when your child engages in certain behaviors. We can use consequences, both the positive and the negative consequences, both the imposed and the natural consequences, to encourage our kids to behave in a certain way and to discourage them from behaving in certain ways. So again, the first step is to figure out what it is that you want your kids to do. You can think of it in terms of what is the problem, but I really think it's helpful to stop and think through, what is your goal in a situation? So if you find out that your kid has been hitting in preschool, you get a report from the teacher and little Johnny hit or bit another classmate, you can take that issue and really strategically address it when Johnny comes home that night. There are a couple different ways that you can do that. You can focus on the aggressive behavior, which is the hitting or the biting, the snatching, the not sharing, whatever it is. You can focus on that behavior and use consequences to try to encourage your kid to stop engaging in that behavior. That is really important work. It is vital, especially when our kids are young, to sit in that space and to teach them that. That's the punishment space. You're trying to decrease particular behaviors by using consequences. The flip side of that is to encourage your child to respond appropriately in those situations. So this is where we equip our kids by helping them learn ways that are effective and healthy and appropriate to deal with the situations that they encounter in life. So when little Johnny comes home from preschool that day, you can talk about not hitting, not biting, not snatching. I also encourage you to talk about what he can do instead to achieve what it is that he was setting out to achieve. Sometimes kids hit or bite, they're aggressive as a way of expressing their frustration and to get their aggression out. A lot of times kids engage in those sorts of behaviors because they're reinforcing. When I snatch the toy away from another kid, I get the toy that I wanted. When I hit another person, I release some of my anger and frustration. I also oftentimes get the thing that I want. So one helpful thing that we can do with our kids is help them learn appropriate ways of achieving those results, because ultimately the aggressive behaviors are not going to be acceptable. They have a lot of unfortunate consequences that you can address. We want to, again, help provide alternative behaviors that are appropriate. We want to steer them in a particular direction, not just away from the aggressive behaviors, but toward appropriate non-aggressive behaviors. In order to know what to do, how to respond as a parent, you need to know what it is that you're working toward. So if you're trying to encourage a particular behavior, you can use this idea of reinforcements to provide things for your child that are going to encourage that behavior. A positive reinforcer is something that you add to the situation to encourage a particular behavior. So if you want your child to engage in particular behaviors, you might acknowledge each time that they do that. You might offer some praise. You might provide some sort of reward. It doesn't have to be a material or monetary reward. It can be a privilege or something that you allow them to do because they're engaging in the appropriate behavior. You're adding something to the situation to encourage that behavior. A negative reinforcer when we use the word negative, it sounds like it's bad, but that's not the case in this framework. Negative just means that we take something away. A negative reinforcer is going to be something that we remove from a situation in order to encourage particular behavior. It's confusing, but if you think about it, A lot of times when your child does the thing that you've been hounding them to do, you suddenly aren't hounding them. They don't have to sit through a lecture. They don't get the frequent reminders that usually end up frustrating them. So you're removing an experience that is normally unpleasant, and that ends up encouraging them to do the behavior that you're wanting them to do. Positive punishment has to do with adding something to a situation in order to decrease their behavior. So that's what we typically think of as a punishment. When we make them do an extra chore around the house because they did something inappropriate, we're adding that chore to their list of to-dos. We're adding that experience in order to get them to stop doing the inappropriate behavior. Negative punisher is something that we take away from the child in order to decrease or discourage that behavior. So that's the removal of privileges most often. So anytime we take away screen time, we take away a device, we take away a social activity that they were going to get to engage in. You know, they don't get to go to that play date because they just did something inappropriate. That is a negative punisher. That is taking something away in order to decrease that particular behavior that they engaged in. We can use all of these concepts to very strategically create plans for responding to behaviors that our kids frequently engage in. If there are particular behaviors that are common in your home, I would encourage you to sit down ahead of time, not when you're in the throes of some big conflict, not when you're having to address the behavior in real time, but when you are in a healthy mental and emotional space, when you have the time to really stop and think strategically and reasonably and logically about how you want to respond, you can sit down and create a plan for how you would use each of these concepts to address a particular behavior. I always encourage parents to identify what are the common things, the things that happen most frequently, the issues that you're having to address most often with your children. Write those down and start coming up with options for responding that fall into these 4 categories. What are some ways of reinforcing this positively and negatively? What are some ways of punishing this behavior positively and negatively? Actually write them out. And then when you're in the middle of a blow up or you're having to address a behavior in real time, you don't have to stop and think through, okay, hang on, what makes sense in this situation? Wait, what was positive reinforcement? What was negative? You would have it all laid out for yourself. You'd be doing yourself a solid ahead of time if you created that in written form and had it available so that the next time this issue comes up, you already have a plan for how you want to respond. That is intentionality, that is proactivity, that is being strategic and logical as you try to shape and mold your children's behavior. This is a really healthy approach for disciplining our kids. It is the most thoughtful and thought out way of addressing behaviors, especially things that happen frequently in the home. My name is Claire White, and I have lots of strategies to help parents address different behaviors and also to encourage healthy relationships and communication within the home. I would encourage you to check those out and reach out to me directly if there's anything that I could provide in addition to that, or if you'd like to work together one-on-one.